Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. We are so glad to be here with you today. My name is C.A. Webb. I'm the president of the Kendall Square Association. Here in Kendall, we're a community full of people on a mission, each with our own niche focus, but driven by a call to solve some of the world's biggest problems. Here, we use data to unlock doors, science to advance healthcare, technology to support public health, all while educating our next generation of leaders. Our members are at the center of the global COVID-19 response, leading on vaccine and therapy development, as you've heard in the news every day this week, contributing to PPE volume, testing to keep our schools, nursing homes, businesses, and public safe. With COVID-19 cases rising across the country at an alarming rate, statewide shutdowns returning, and even greater uncertainty heading into the holidays, we wanted to make sure that you are getting the most up-to-date information straight from the source of Massachusetts testing experts. During the next hour, you'll hear from leaders in the front line of our pandemic who are pivoting their technologies to build capacity, collaborating with former competitors, and transforming the COVID-19 testing landscape to keep us safe and help Massachusetts and the world realize pandemic resilience. To start off the meeting, I want to take a moment to go over a couple of details of the Zoom webinar. If you have any technical difficulties, please just post those questions in the Q&A. During the panel, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Please upvote the questions that are most important to you. Note that the chat function has been disabled for the event. Please use hashtag #KendallOnTheFrontline to share comments and insights about what you learn here today. You'll find us on Twitter, live tweeting this event. So to help us understand how testing has evolved and plan for a safer holiday season, winter, and eventual return to work, I'm thrilled to welcome Boston Globe reporter Shirley Leung. Shirley has tackled several pieces on the impacts we will all experience from another government shutdown, how other countries are responding to surges in cases, and the business community's belief that expanded testing will save lives and our economy. Over to you, Shirley.
Thank you, CA. This is my first time doing a Kendall Square Association event, so I'm very excited. And I'm very excited to hear from our three panels today. We're going to hear from Stacey Gabriel, Rodrigo Martinez, and Celina from LabCentral. And I started to talk to CA a few weeks ago about the role of testing in helping to keep the economy open. You know, why do we keep restricting business activity when infections rise? Why not do widespread and frequent testing to keep the economy up and running? And if you think about it, by and large, we test when people have symptoms or have been exposed. But what if more employers did what the universities are doing and they're testing students and faculty at least once a week? Why isn't government mandating the Walmarts and the Amazons and the airlines and the grocery store chains and restaurants to test all their employees once a week? And if they do, then they can keep their doors open. You know, wouldn't that go a long way to containing COVID before a vaccine arrives? I'm hoping this panel will shed light on some of these questions and whether it is possible and whether it is worth it for employers to do so much testing, especially when the vaccines are supposed to be widely available later next year. So for today's conversation, we're going to change up the format a bit. I'm going to interview Stacey, Rodrigo, and Celina separately because each has a unique perspective on testing. And then I'm going to bring all three panelists back together in the second half of the webinar. We had a ton of pre-submitted questions from the audience. I've already worked them into our discussion in the second half, and also actually in the first half as well. And the questions that we got were really terrific, true to form, Kendall Square. You ask really smart questions. And if you want to ask a live question, I know CA went over this already. If you can ask a live question during the panel, please use the Q&A function in Zoom. The chat function has been turned off. So first up is Stacey Gabriel. Hopefully Stacey can turn on her camera now. Hi, Stacey. So Stacey is the Senior Director of the Genomics Platform at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. Under Stacey's guidance, the platform operates as one of the largest sequencing centers in the world. Is Stacey back? Or there you are. Hi, Stacey. So Stacey, I have heard so much about what you've done at the Broad as it relates to COVID-19 testing. I mean, how did you go from genomics to processing molecular tests during a pandemic, and why? I mean, this is something I think like Quest Labs or diagnostics would do, not the Broad. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, how's that?
Great.
Great. All right, so sorry about that. Yeah, so I guess the why is the easiest question, right? The why is because we had to. It was, I think the very most important thing we could have done. And, our goal is to be impactful, to medicine, to healthcare, to the community. And so, so we had to. And I think that, big companies like Quest, they have different types of decisions and different incentives, and like it's not something I have visibility into, but I do know that like the approach that labs like that typically take is very different than us. We very much believe in modular, scalable, sort of build it from the ground up kind of systems. We've been doing that in sequencing since the days of the Human Genome Project, and so we applied those same principles to our testing, and we didn't do things that we saw were going badly elsewhere, like depend on these sort of black box systems that were the supply chains and the kits. And so we really sort of tried to turn the problem on its head and use a very open, unconstrained system so we could really scale and not have those same constraints.
So tell me, were you thinking we're going to make Broad a major player? I mean, I think at one time you were processing like 20% of the country's COVID testings at one time. So when did the light bulb go off? Was it January, February, March? When did this start?
Right, so it started on March 8th. On March 8th, one of our faculty members, Deb Hung, who's a tremendous infectious disease doctor from the Brigham, called me and said, "You've got to help, please help." And so, within a 2-week time frame, we validated an assay and we just got started. I won't tell you that there was a thoughtful, like, we're going to be at 100,000 tests someday. That never happened. It was very much, it was gradual, it was learn, it was see what the need is. And, we started off with nursing homes. There was a huge outcry to support nursing homes because so many of them were like on fire, literally massive outbreaks. And so we started with the nursing homes. We started with local nursing homes. Then the state took notice, the Commonwealth, I should say. Massachusetts said, well, you did it in Cambridge for those nursing homes. Can you help all of them? And so, again, being like the most important thing we could do, that's what we did. So we got to thousands a day. And then the colleges started talking to us, around that sort of May timeframe and said, could you help the colleges? Could you help us come back? And so we stood back and said, well, we're doing thousands. Let's get to tens of thousands per day. And we did. And so we've been at, 70,000 plus tests per day since mid-August.
So tell us a little bit about the technical side. I mean, if you're able to flip this switch that quickly, do an assay and create an assay in 2 weeks, can any lab do this? Can anybody just do what the Broad just did?
Yeah, there's a lot of answers to that question. I could probably fill the hour with that, but I'll say a few things. Yes, academic labs can do an awful lot. And there are some great examples of other labs like BU, like University of Illinois, like GW in DC, that are getting to thousands per day. And thousands per day can make a big impact locally. And I applaud them. And it shows what you can do if you put your mind to it. This is just a PCR test. It's not, sending a man to the moon, right?
Stacey, tell us, for the non-scientists, yeah, what do you mean by it's just a PCR test? What does that mean?
Right, so our test is a PCR test. Basically we are isolating nucleic acid from a sample and running a polymerase chain reaction, which is an amplification reaction, in a simple machine from Thermo, runs the PCR. It takes about 70 minutes to run and you get a yes or no result. It's much easier than DNA sequencing, take my word for it.
Why do academic labs, I've heard this before, people are like, any academic lab could do this. Why does an academic lab have this equipment? in technology?
So PCR is a technology that's been around since the 80s, right? And it's a general tool that we have in our sort of, toolbox in molecular biology to amplify nucleic acid. Very generic. People do it all over the world and all over the country in any lab. So the PCR machine is there, right? The issue is that there's a lot of, I think people have to be able to get around obstacles, right? Because there will be obstacles when you sort of try to start doing something clinically or diagnostically. Some of those are regulatory obstacles. And so there are certain ways, the FDA at the beginning did try to help and say, you can submit for this thing called an emergency use authorization, an EUA. You probably heard about in the press, related to the vaccines. But early in the testing, they said you can submit your EUA and you don't have to wait for us to get back to you. So long as you've done a validation, start testing. And that really opened up the door to start things. And so labs have to go through the process, or certain labs have said, you know what, we're going to do more of a surveillance activity, right? We're going to just broadly screen. We're not going to return an individual diagnostic. And that still helps too, because you could spot then where you might have an outbreak. And then in that outbreak scenario, go and follow up, right? So there's different ways around it, but it takes groups sort of being willing to do the hard work of confronting those obstacles.
Now, we had a bunch of questions pre-submitted about, about testing, kind of the technical testing, like what's the difference between, molecular or the rapid tests. And I mean, specifically people were asking, like, I thought that, we had, how come we're not doing those brain swabs anymore? How come nasals, the nostrils are doable now? Like, what happened?
Well, nothing, the test itself hasn't changed, I should say that. I mean, we still accept the brain swabs, some of those still come in to one of our processes. What we did though, was we gathered the data to prove that the nasal swabs, those are the little Q-tip ones that just go in the front of your nose, that we gathered enough data to prove to the FDA that the results are comparable, right? That's all it was. And so we knew that if we really wanted people to screen regularly, they weren't going to tolerate that uncomfortable brain swab, right? And so that's why it was important to switch to the little nasal swab. And the other thing is supply chain. So those little Q-tip type swabs get made in millions and millions and millions, of quantities, where nasal swabs are, it's just more sparingly in terms of like how you can get them. Yeah.
I have time for one more question for you before we move on to Rodrigo. So I was, tell me a little bit about, your process. I think your process is seeing these tests at cost. Like, how did you decide to do that versus trying to make money?
Well, we're a nonprofit. Yeah. So it was never really a consideration, right? I mean, we priced it to make sure we weren't going to lose money, because that would, be bad for our overall research mission. So we wanted to make sure we didn't lose money, and we wanted to just do this to enable as much testing as possible.
Great. Well, Stacey, thank you for sharing us the story of the Broad and how it got into PCR testing. And so we're going to say goodbye to you, and then we're going to say hello to Rodrigo Martinez. So Rodrigo, if you could turn on your video and unmute yourself. So he is the Chief Marketing and Experience Officer at CIC Health. He has been a longtime leader at the intersection of life sciences and marketing. Rodrigo, are you on yet?
I'm here. I can see you.
Oh, here you are. I see you. Hi. So when I think of the CIC, right, I think of WeWork, I think of an incubator space. I do not think of it as launching a consumer COVID testing product. And so how did that come about?
Yeah, no, great question. So look, you're right. CIC, Tim Rowe and his amazing team started CIC 20 years ago. And I think one of the challenges when the pandemic started in February, March, really, is many of the startups that come to these different facilities from CIC, as everybody else, started getting concerned. So Tim and the team started thinking, well, could we have someone come and help us test our tenants? And trying to look for somebody that could deliver that service, he could found no one. So he said, well, what if we set out the pieces to do it ourselves? So if we can manage to do the pieces to do it ourselves, we have an amazing collaboration with the Broad Institute. So the team reached out to the Broad, and then also to a couple of other players, and put all the pieces together very quickly, and suddenly we could start testing the tenants of CIC, and organizations started coming in saying, hey, could you also test me? Could you also test me? And that's basically, long story short, suddenly CIC Health emerged as its own startup, as a, it's a subsidiary of CIC, if you like. But now we have 50 people, it's a startup. We've had 3.5 months of business, and now we've done almost close to 300,000 tests. So that's really how it started.
So 300, is that what you expected, or did that exceed expectations?
Well, I mean, there's no way to know, and very similar to what Stacey was describing. First of all, again, we couldn't have done this with a partnership together with the Broad from the beginning, because we don't have a lab. In this case, the Broad became our first lab that we partnered with. What we put pieces together was the other missing elements. So the demand is clearly out there. There are many different people, students, teachers, people in prisons, elderly care, that need testing. And lab capacity exists, and also added capacity, like the Broad and others that have added capacity. The piece that was missing was the connection between those two, the bridge. So what we really are is the connection between the demand, and have a whole set of systems for schools, elderly care, prisons, et cetera, to test, and then also individuals. And we connect that with labs like the Broad and others that we're now working with.
So Rodrigo, you are going to demonstrate a test for us, right?
Sure. So part of our business is with organizations, and part of our business is with individuals that we provide testing services to. Right now here in Maine, 245 Main Street in Kendall Square. So what someone walking into Main Street, for example, would do is, they would come in, they check in, they have an appointment. So all of our open to public space for testing, you have to schedule an appointment. So you have a 6-minute slot. So there's no long lines. You basically come in, you do what you need to do, and you're out in 5 minutes. And that's part of what we've tried to do.
And how much is the cost?
So the cost for the public is $80. And then for our organizations, we have many different combinations of tests and everything from $10 to $70, depending on a series of things that I'm happy to talk about. So the person coming in or one of the individuals testing would come in, check in, their name is right, they check that it's the right person. And then you have to blow your nose. You go ahead, blow your nose, you Purell, and then in this little simple tube, just one takes that out. There's here this is exactly the little Q-tip that Stacey was mentioning before. And so this little Q-tip, it's just literally like a Q-tip. This goes inside your nose, and it goes like this for, anywhere from 5 to 7 turns, just gently on one side, then on the other side. And carefully, that goes into this little tube that I just showed before. And then I cap it, that's it. And it puts it there, and you're out, you're done.
And you do it yourself, or does someone else do it for you?
No, we do it ourselves. You do it yourself. Everybody does it themselves, except for some children, we have a personal clinician, a personal that has some training to be able to help with children. So we actually do also children from ages 2 and above. And then these tubes then get sent right now to the lab, to the Broad down the street, and in boxes and boxes and boxes, and they get going with their amazing line, and then the results come back, and then we send the results back to our customers.
And how soon do you get the results, and does insurance cover it?
Yeah, so results in general are around 24 hours on average. So sometimes they come a little sooner, sometimes they come a little later, and that's been sort of the norm for the last couple of months. There are moments where it goes to 10 hours past or 36 hours because there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of things happening. But in general, on average, it's about 24 hours. At this point, so we're working very hard. The approach that we took for pricing is the following. As opposed to other organizations, our goal is not to maximize profit. So we didn't start from saying, what's the highest possible price that I can charge? Because that's what insurance will reimburse others. We started from the bottom, which is, what is the minimum we need to do, and what's the lowest possible price that we can have with a very small, healthy margin, so we can just keep on the lights going and keep on expanding. And that's how we arrived to our pricing. So for organizations, public schools, for example, have a different price. Private institutions have a different price, but that can range anything from $10 on the pooled testing to $70, depending on what that is. For individuals, it's $80. We don't take insurance yet. We're working really hard on it because there's a series of legal requirements that you can imagine we need to comply in order to do that. But we're also exploring partnerships with other players that could allow us to expand even faster into different regions of New England.
So one more question for me before we move on to Celina. So of the 300,000 tests that you've done, I mean, what percentage are repeat, like it's one organization and they're doing it with the same employees or same people all the time versus someone walking off the street and just getting a test?
Yeah, most of them are right now are still new people because we've grown incredibly, right? So this is only 3 months. So you have to imagine that we went from August doing 1,000 tests to like literally we're doing today, depending on the day, between 5,000 and 6,000 a day.
Wow.
Right? So schools repeat. So we have about 30 or 40 different schools in the area, public and private. We're doing we're doing a pilot already with Watertown for pool testing there. We're doing we just opened 5 sites in the state of Vermont. All of the state of Vermont testing now we're supporting. So some of that, all of that is new. And then all the way to organizations like Boston Ballet, hospitals. One of the top hospitals that had an outbreak a couple of weeks ago needed immediate support. And we were able in 16 hours to set up to get them testing capacity. And we tested close to 8,000 people over a week.
Wow.
So most of it is new because it's just happening so much. Even in the last 24 hours, there are new demands that are coming that we are doing the best we can to stay up with it.
Well, Rodrigo, that was fascinating. Thank you for sharing your nostrils and your snot with us today. That is a virtual first for me. So I wish my kids were here. My 7-year-old, he would love to have seen that. He's like, boogers on Zoom. I love it. Anyways, we will see you in a bit. Next up is Celina Chang. Celina, turn on your video and unmute. So Celina is the Vice President of Science Operations at LabCentral. She leads corporate operations pertaining to science, technology, and strategic relationships. And according to her LabCentral biography, her favorite school science project was, quote, "We grew mutant tadpoles in high school biochemistry. I named him Fred." Celina, are you there?
Here.
Hi, Celina. Hi. So you are also going to give us a demonstration of your rapid test, right? And so this is in clinical trial, I believe, right? Yes. And so, anyways, you wanna pull it out and show us?
Yeah, I'm going to spare you another nostril demonstration. So I did that while I was off camera.
Okay, thank you. No, I actually liked it. I liked seeing Rodrigo's do that.
It was essentially the same thing. So very front of the nose, you just swab on both sides of your both nostrils. This is what the test looks like. So it kind of looks like a pregnancy test where you have a little window at the bottom where you add your sample, and then you'll actually see the liquid run up the strip, and then you have a control line at the top and a test line at the bottom. If you have a test line that comes up, that means you're positive. If it's just the control line, then that means you're negative. If the control line doesn't come up, then it's invalid. You just have to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I swabbed myself and I put it into our little buffer. So you can see the swab is in the tube.
Oh, so you put the whole thing in there. Got it.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to take this little dropper and I'm just going to go into the bottom, drop a little bit of liquid, and then I'm going to very carefully not squeeze it onto my computer. But I'm just going to add a couple drops.
What is that liquid? Is it water or something else?
So it's a salt buffer solution with a little bit of a detergent, which actually inactivates the virus. So you can see now that the liquid is starting to run up. It's purple.
Yes.
So I'm going to leave it on my desk for a few minutes because
And
it
then
has
we'll
to
talk.
run across the surface. And then when we're done talking, I can show you the result.
So how long will it take for a result to show up?
So you can actually see it very clearly at 3 minutes. We ask people to look between 3 minutes and 15 minutes, but not longer than that. Because then once the strip starts to dry, then it starts to, it can give some false positives that make people nervous.
So tell us a little bit of the science behind what the rapid test is versus what we saw with the PCR test that Rodrigo demonstrated. Like,
yeah.
What's the difference in terms of efficacy and you know, and I think you recommend taking this twice a week, this test, right?
Yeah, so the difference between the tests are that the PCR test actually takes the virus and breaks it apart, and then you take out the nucleic acids and actually expand that, and then you can measure it with this machine, this qPCR machine. This test itself is looking for live viral particles. So you're looking at whole virus. And so there are antibodies that are stamped onto these strips that will detect the nucleoprotein, so the outside coating of the virus itself. And so it's just a different way to detect the virus. The sensitivity on these tests are when you have a high viral load, it's very sensitive, can be up to 100%. So at the beginning of somebody's infection, if they are shedding high, titers in this infection, you can detect it very easily with this antigen test. At the tail end of your infection, when you don't have as many viral particles that are being shed, that's where the sensitivity starts to drop off. But at that point, it doesn't really matter. You're going to go through your infection, your sickness. You'll, wait a couple days until you're really feeling well, and then, once you test negative with the PCR, then you're good to go. So these are really good ways to screen for, active infections. It's different from a blood test, which is testing for antibodies, which is your body's reaction to an active infection, or if you had been infected before. Your body produces these antibodies to help you fight off any other infections that might be trying to attack.
And why would you pick one test over the other? If you had a choice, is one better for a certain situation or how you were infected? I mean, how would you make a decision on that?
So, I think that there are multiple ways that you can test for this virus, and I think that they're all very valuable. So the PCR is your gold standard. It is highly sensitive. You can detect very, very low amounts of virus. But when you're trying to, especially for this particular disease, where we know that the people are shedding virus at very high rates before they start showing symptoms, which is why this is so hard to control. If you are, and you asked before whether you needed to test twice a week. So it really depends on the prevalence of the disease in an area. So if you have a lot of people who are infected and they are spreading the virus and you're not able to see it, this is a really great way to screen a population and see if you can find people early in their infection and actually isolate them early so that you can, kind of control the spread of the virus.
Can you show us, is your result yet?
Yep. So I'm negative.
So wait, so what's C, what's T?
C is the control line, which means that it's working.
Uh-huh.
And T, there's nothing there, which means that that's the test line, which means that's the strip that is looking for the virus itself.
So if I were positive, what would it look like?
If you were positive, you would actually have a very bright band at the T line also, so you have 2 bands.
Okay, got it, got it. And so, so is a test like this already available on the market, or do you, you know, and do you think employers would buy something like this, or consumers? Like I would just go to CVS and get it.
So there are other rapid antigen tests that are on the market, but they're all authorized only for point of care use, which means that you have to go to a doctor's office, or you have to have a nurse or someone who is administering the test for you, and it's being done in a laboratory setting, so, or in that facility. So it's not something that you can do at home right now. We are trying to get, I know that there are companies all over the place that are trying to get at-home testing available. At least right now, there's only at-home swabbing. So, you know, getting the kits and then, you know, taking your sample and then sending it to a laboratory to get tested. But because these particular tests are so easy and so fast, it would be great to get them at home. But because of the regulations of, you know, it's really complex trying to get through all the regulations that are out there. And so there's nothing available right now for at-home testing that is an antigen. We did hear about, I believe it was Lucira, who just had their EUA approved from FDA for at-home testing. That is not an antigen test, it's a molecular test. And you have to have that little device that you have to have the device at home in order to do that. You have to have a doctor's prescription, which means that you're symptomatic at that point. And it's only for, I believe, people that are older than the age of 14. So it's not approved for children. Right. So and it's only available in Florida and California, I believe.
Now, what about Abbott? I thought Abbott has a rapid test that the government bought. What is that?
They do. Those are all point of care. You have to go to it, you know, and it's for symptomatic people. There have not been many asymptomatic trials, I believe, and so that's why we had partnered with E25 Bio to do that in the LabCentral community.
Right. And real quickly, last question, 30 seconds. What is the status of your clinical trial with your rapid test?
So we're right in the middle of it, and it's going pretty well. We have been able to detect several cases and get them at home and under a doctor's care and isolated. We have not seen any outbreaks in our facilities, which is fantastic. And so it gives us more confidence in the fact that these rapid antigen tests can be really useful in helping to stop the spread of this virus.
Great. All right, thank you, Celina. We're going to welcome back Rodrigo and Stacey. Please turn on your cameras. I'm going to shut my window because I can hear my kids playing basketball. I hope you guys can't hear it, but anyways, Stacey, unmute. Rodrigo, you're unmuted. Celina, you're unmuted. So I have a bunch of questions from the audience, and so since we're largely talking about testing, to contain COVID. How much of the population needs to be tested and how often?
I can jump in on that. So it really, as I said before, it really depends on the prevalence of the disease in an area.
Okay, let's say Massachusetts. Let's use a real example. Massachusetts, 7 million people.
Massachusetts is, and again, it depends on which community you're in, but Massachusetts is in a mid to high prevalence right now, which means that twice a week testing is going to be very helpful in terms of screening a population to try to find those positive individuals.
And what would it take for everybody to be tested twice a week? I mean, I've heard like we need to build like 6 roads. Stacey's going to be very busy. But I mean, Stacey, you must have back of the envelope penciled this out, right?
We certainly have many times. And and that's why we're going to explore things like pooling, right? Because the point is to find positives, right? And if the prevalence stays low enough, right, we can pool and find a lot of negative pools and assure those people they're not infected, but then spot the ones where you are going to have to go follow up with somebody. And so I do think that'll be key. I do, if we do a pool of 10, I can tell you that instead of my capacity being 100,000 a day, it's 1 million a day, right? Of people to be tested. So of course there are logistics to work out. That's not straightforward by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think we're going to have to get awfully, creative around that very soon in order to be able to make that kind of impact.
If I can add one point, Shirley, I think, look, there's no question this pandemic is as much as a science challenge and a medical challenge as it is a communications challenge, right? So what's it going to take? First of all, we also need to have an incredible communication strategy, even to describe the differences between tests. Where are the sites? Where do you go? How do I interpret this result? Like the communication piece of this has been, I think, globally, nationally, clearly also an issue. So I think part of what it's going to take is a very strong communication campaign that is, built from the bottom up. Just like we build a lab from the bottom up, the logistics from the bottom up, the communication from the bottom up, and the service has to be from the bottom up.
I mean, right now the communication is, if you have symptoms, if you've been exposed, go take a test. So that's the communication now. Is that the right communication?
Well, I think, look, there's definitely validity in that, but that is not the only one, right? If I ask you today, do you know around you where you can get tested, Shirley, and which days they're open? There is no way you will be able to tell me, right? Because some sites are open Monday to Tuesday and 2 to 4 and 5 to 6, and some have lunch and some have don't, and some require an appointment. And this is one of the reasons that when on our B2C side of the business, when we open 245 Main Street, from the beginning, you have an appointment, you book your appointment, it is clear where, what, why. And that's, we need to design this as a service. And we had to triple the available slots already for this weekend on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thank you also to Stacey and the team, because we literally had to triple everything because people want to come, but we're still not doing lines. We still want to have clear messaging. Like, this is a messaging and communications opportunity also to do that properly. So I think that, we need to consider that seriously as much as the equipment and as much as the science.
So just a reminder, keep your live questions coming through the Q&A. I can see some of them queued up already. Any of you have a sense of what percentage of the general Kendall Square biotech pharma, companies, how many are doing asymptomatic regular COVID testing of their on-site staff, and how often?
I don't know how many. I will say many are. I know the Broad is. I know that because I get tested regularly, and the guidance here is every 4th day, that you're on site, and that's been working. We've been doing that since May, and it has worked. We've identified a low number of positives, but some, and there's been no sort of on-site transmission, so it's been very helpful for that. And then there's lots of the small companies around here as well that are testing out. Rodrigo might know better because they've sort of been our interface to many of these employers.
Yeah, I would say similarly with us, everybody at CIC Health and CIC gets tested twice a week. We have companies from many different sizes. So clients like Recon Strategy, which is an old client from CIC, to restaurants, kindly Ana Sortuna, Roleana reached out when they had an opportunity to they needed to test everybody. We were able to test all of them over a weekend, all of the staff. So we have many restaurants, we have, banks, etc. I would say the large sort of big pharma buildings, some of the bigger players in Kendall Square are still slow in getting into that. And, it's a combination of factors. If many of the parents, their kids are not going to school, or they are going to school, and many of them are still asked or are able to work from home. So I think that also plays a part of it.
And also I point out that there's a big focus on sort of like the other precautions, right? While the people are coming into the buildings, with the masks, with the distancing, with keeping the density low. So I think that's also helping a lot as well.
Yeah. And I think one last point is that we're about to open another site. Hopefully, I'll let you know very soon, outside a little bit of the central area, Boston, Kendall. We'll know soon, probably in 10 days. Being close to where people live, obviously, is a different, it facilitates as opposed to where people work. So we're also trying to support both of those environments.
Celina, there's two questions from the audience about your LabCentral antigen test. One is, what is the projected price for the test, and when will it be available in Massachusetts?
Those are really good questions. The pricing we anticipate will be $5 or less per test, and we're waiting on FDA to give approval. The EUA was submitted months ago, and they've been in active discussions, and so we're hoping that we'll get at least point of care authorization soon. That's the hope. But it's tough because FDA is swamped with all sorts of applications that are coming through, and again,
this seems like an important one, though. Or, I mean, the whole category of rapid tests, and the things that you could do on your own. So,
yeah. I just wanted to throw in a comment from the previous question, which was, talking about capacity for testing. We really believe that, if we can get these antigen tests to be broadly marketed out there and used as a screening test, then you don't need to overwhelm the PCR. The PCR is really, really important when you're trying to confirm a diagnosis. But when you're flooding the system with 94% of negative tests, it makes it really hard. There are supply chain issues, there are long lines, it's just needing to go somewhere to get sampled and submit your samples. It makes it really difficult. And so if you can cut out all of those negatives by just being able to screen on a regular basis very inexpensively, it can really help the entire state with, just managing this whole disease and the spread of it.
So we had a bunch of questions submitted earlier about, what does home testing look like? Will there be fast and cheap options on the horizon? I've heard that as soon as the spring, and I don't know if it's you, Celina, or maybe Celina, you can start us off, but can you paint a picture? It's like, I think about, I'm sequestered at home, I have kids, in hybrid school, so I feel a little, I feel like a walking, perhaps, petri dish sometimes, with my kids in school. And so if I wanted to have coffee with my boss, I would feel more comfortable if I got some kind of test and maybe he got some kind of test. And so kind of paint a little picture of what next year might look like with the ability for consumers to use their own tests.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we all just, every single test that's out there, there can be, false results that come back. So we still all have to be really careful. We should continue to wear our masks and socially distance, where possible. We're not going to go up and hug people in large groups and gatherings and things like that. But having that peace of mind of being, saying, I did my test today and I got a negative result and I'm feeling pretty good that I am not going to infect you. That will ease a lot of people's stress and anxiety and help us to know where we can actually start to open up again. It doesn't, we don't need to necessarily shut down the entire economy if we can screen people and make sure that we can open up safely.
We have another question from the audience. Do you think employers should do mandatory or voluntary testing? Stacey, I guess for you, it's mandatory, right?
Yeah, it's mandatory for people who come on site at the Broad. That's right.
Same for us.
And for you. So how do you guys feel about that? What was the reaction internally that you have to do mandatory testing?
I don't think there was an issue here at the Broad. I think everyone understands it. I mean, it's really important and people have accepted it, just like wearing masks or doing anything else that we have to do to take precautions. So there was no pushback.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the beginning, when people were only using the nasal pharyngeal swabs, the tickle your brain, that kind of set people off a little bit. But now that it's so easy, it's really a no-brainer. And, I know that, at LabCentral, we have 65 companies in-house, and all of the CEOs are looking for solutions to have every single, person who's on site tested on a regular basis. It shouldn't really be a question.
And I think if you look at the colleges, you know, I was on a phone call with Dr. Burks earlier, and she made a very strong point that the colleges where it was optional to be tested, you know, their rates of infectivity were very high. The colleges where it was mandatory to be tested, their rates stayed below 1%. So she feels like, you know, I'm just quoting something she said earlier, but that's a really clear indication that testing should be made, you know, mandatory in certain settings.
Wow, that's interesting. And I know that some universities, they do random testing. So it's like, while not everybody is tested, so that you know you might get tested, and if you turn positive, you might be kicked off campus. So that also makes people, right, behave differently, you know?
I've absolutely heard that from some of the colleges that we're testing for, that they can see the behavior changing because they know that the students know they might be picked that week.
Right, right.
So they've been appreciative of that.
So let's say it's the fall of 2021, right? And most everyone has gotten some kind of COVID vaccine, right? So do we still need testing? Is this just only a temporary problem, the need for testing? You know,
we're not going to need this amount it won't be this amount of testing likely, right? But I think, you know, people will still want to know, right, if they're symptomatic especially. But I do believe that we are at a point in time here where it is needed. You know, there's asymptomatic spread, and certainly the hope is that once these vaccines are widely available, that we'll be able to do a lot less of this.
I would add another part there again is communication, right? Even when the vaccines are available, it does not mean that people will understand to take them or not to take them, how long they got to wait to see if their neighbor has a side effect or not. Forget about the 30, I don't know the exact percentage, 20, 30% of people in this country that don't want to take vaccines and have an issue with vaccination. And so clearly we have an issue ongoing for the nation past when the vaccine is available. I think there's going to be an overlap between when the vaccine is available and distributed and you actually can take it and people want to take it, and testing. And that could be 6 months or it could be a year, clearly.
So Celina, will people still need your antigen tests? You think people will still use it with the vaccines?
I think so. You know, even if they roll out the vaccine, you know, next month, which would be fantastic, that would only cover a portion of the first line, you know, workers. Say we hit June or July, we might be able to get, you know, maybe 50% of the population. You're still going to have 50% of the population that's still susceptible. And so until we can really get to like maybe 90% of the population, you know, vaccinated or have, you know, what we call herd immunity, you're still going to need some sort of testing because there's still that ability for the virus to spread.
So I have two more questions and then we're almost done here, if you can believe it. So this is a question that came in earlier from an attendee. What is testing telling us about the spread of COVID-19?
Yeah, it's telling us what we had suspected early on, that there is asymptomatic spread of this virus, and this is why we cannot get it under control.
Yep.
Exactly right.
So I have one last question for all of you before I hand this back to CA. So the last question is actually a birthday gift to President Biden-elect. I think he turned 78 today, right? So what is the one piece of advice you would give to Biden on how best to control COVID-19 and get our economy back on track?
Mask mandates across the country, and I think an investment in testing, obviously, even the rapid testing where you're going to be able to do the $5 test, right? Because it's just exactly like Celina said, let's spot people out there who are positive and then have the follow-up for the diagnostic. But I think a systematic, message from the top, a consistent one is really what's going to be needed. It can't just be here and there because people travel, people go around different places and then we're not controlling this. So I just think a systematic approach is what's going to be mostly needed.
Can I add one comment to that? When I look at Massachusetts, we have a huge I think we have pretty good mask compliance, right? We've done that. We have leaders with that messaging, and so so why is the spread still happening here?
I would ask, sorry, go ahead, Stacey.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to answer the question, Shirley. So in my birthday ask, my birthday gift is, again, we need an incredible communications campaign. This should be the best ever communications campaign in media, social. We need to put experts with people that actually have influence on people, artists, Lady Gaga with a sports person, with a community leader, with a scientist. Like, we need the creativity to communicate and get people excited as we have never seen. And I think that would be my ask, is we need that creativity and communication of this plan.
I would say that I don't know if Biden can do this or not, but FDA needs to become more nimble in what they're doing. There's so many hurdles for small, really innovative companies that are coming up with clever diagnostics that can be rapid and inexpensive. And the small companies are really suffering. They are just have hurdle after hurdle after hurdle to jump over to try to get their solutions out there.
I totally agree with that one, for sure.
Or we actually have a little more time, so I can go through a couple more questions. So this is actually on the issue of testing. What about testing on the district or city infrastructure level? Like, we hear about the testing the sewer systems, and are there other kinds of or water supply testing? How should that kind of testing be going on as well?
Absolutely. That is so cool. That technology is awesome to be able to see where you have communities that are really high with infection rates, and be able to then zone in and do rapid testing, screening with these antigen tests, and then getting the PCRs that they need to get the diagnostics. These should all work together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another question, I'm trying to do rapid fire to do a little time. So what are your recommendations for testing students and teachers in schools in order to bring students and teachers back into schools? And what are the costs involved to do that?
Yeah, we have 100 different organizations, all different types of private, public schools, colleges of all forms and color, everything. And we have, basically, we set up everything so that the testing can happen at the school with different timelines. Sometimes it's once a week, twice a week, every 2 weeks, random, all possible combinations. And again, we have, now introducing pooled testing, the prices will range $10 from test to $70. So it's actually also affordable in many cases for many of these schools. To do that. We're doing right now our pilot, I think I mentioned, for example, with the Watertown School District, the whole district, for pool testing and others. So there's many, if anybody's interested in that, and by all means, please contact us. We'd be happy to help you.
And I think it's scale, and with certain added efficiencies, we'll get it even cheaper than that, would be our goal. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think the pooled approach makes a lot of sense for these schools. Many of the schools are also getting access to the Abbott Binex, that can help with the symptomatic cases and help with teachers. And so I do think there's going to be a suite of sort of activities that will come to these schools. And I think it's so important, as we look into what will happen in 2021, after the holidays.
And even it seems like we're at the kind of a tipping point where we'll have a lot of testing, but it's not enough to kind of save us from the second wave, right? I mean, what can be, it's not like overnight this is going to help us, right? I mean, this might save us from a third wave or something. I don't know. Anything about timing?
Yeah, it's really people's behavior, because you really start to see the surge, 2 weeks after, a week or 2 weeks after they've done something, right? So that's the problem, is that we really have to be all on the same page about how to behave and to treat, the others in our community, and to really think about how our behavior impacts what happens in the future.
All right. Well, thank you, Celina, Rodrigo, and Stacey. I think someone's going to be typing an email to the Biden transition team, right? Faster, more nimble FDA approvals, better communication strategy, and national mask mandate, and of course, more testing. So I'm going to hand this back to CA, who's going to close us out. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Wow, thank you, Shirley, for facilitating a dynamic conversation. And thank you, Stacey, Rodrigo, and Celina, for sharing your expertise with us today. I'm so glad that the Kendall Square Association could help shine a light on what scientists and leaders are doing here in Kendall to make testing more reliable, more accessible, and more affordable. Thank you to my colleagues, Abby, Valentine, Alana, and Carolyn for making today's event possible. You can keep the conversation going on Twitter using hashtag #KendallOnTheFrontline. Please let us know what else you'd like to learn about COVID-19 from the Kendall community by completing the quick survey that we've shared, and look for a follow-up event on vaccine development in January. To stay up to date on Kendall's latest COVID-19 innovation, please sign up for our weekly newsletter and follow us on social. Please join the Kendall Square scientific community in putting public health first. Please stay home this Thanksgiving. I wish you all a happy and safe holiday season.